Imagine being trapped in a metal tube, 6 miles above the earth, as an invisible enemy slowly fills the air with poison. For the passengers and crew of Air Canada Flight 797, this was a nightmare that became a terrifying race against time. On a warm afternoon on June 2, 1983, at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, 41 passengers and 5 crew members boarded a McDonnell Douglas DC-294, a routine flight to Montreal, with a scheduled stop in Toronto. The atmosphere was light, filled with the typical hum of pre-flight anticipation. In the cockpit, 2 highly experienced aviators prepared for the journey. Captain Donald Cameron, a 51-year-old pilot with over 13,000 flight hours, was a seasoned veteran. Beside him was First Officer Claude Ouimet, younger at 34, but with a solid 5,500 hours of experience. They were a capable team, trusted with this aircraft, registered CFTLU, but this particular aircraft had a past. Just 3 years earlier, it had suffered a catastrophic explosive decompression that tore through the rear of the plane, requiring months of extensive repairs. Wires were spliced, lavatories were replaced, and bulkheads were reinforced. It was a history known to the crew, a footnote in the plane's tech log that listed a litany of recurring electrical gremlins. As the plane pushed back from the gate, no one could have known that the ghost of that past repair was waiting to awaken. The takeoff was flawless. Flight 797 climbed into the clear Texan sky, reaching its cruising altitude of 33,000 feet without incident. The cabin service began. The gentle clinking of drinks and meals being served filled the air. In the cockpit, Captain Cameron discussed the weather with his first officer, while Ouimet commented on his in-flight steak, finding it a little dry. It was a picture of normalcy. Then, about an hour and 20 minutes into the flight, a sudden rapid series of clicks shattered the calm. The sound came from the circuit breaker panel behind the captain's seat. Cameron turned and identified 3 tripped breakers, all linked to the motor that flushed the aft left lavatory. His first assumption was a common nuisance. A passenger had likely jammed the toilet with a towel or something similar, causing the motor to overheat and the breakers to trip as a safety measure. He attempted to reset them, but they wouldn't stay in. They felt loose, ineffective. With a sigh, he noted the issue in the tech log, adding one more entry to this plane's long list. What they had just dismissed as a minor inconvenience was, in reality, the first symptom of a catastrophic failure already unfolding mere feet behind them. Unseen and undetected, behind the plastic paneling of that rear lavatory, a tragedy was brewing. 2 electrical wires, their insulation likely worn down from the previous repairs and years of vibration, were now touching. This created a short-circuit, a continuous, uncontrolled flow of electricity that generated intense heat. The heat smoldered the insulation, then the surrounding soundproofing material, and a fire was born. It was a slow, insidious blaze, hidden from view, feeding on the very structure of the aircraft. Minutes later, the first tangible sign reached the cabin. A passenger in the rear rows alerted a flight attendant to a strange smell, acrid, like burning electrical components. Another passenger chimed in, confirming the odor. The flight attendant's training kicked in. She cautiously approached the lavatory door and cracked it open. A thick, gray plume of smoke billowed out, filling the aft galley. There were no visible flames, just this choking, opaque cloud. The senior flight attendant was notified, and he rushed back with a CO2 fire extinguisher. He opened the door fully, unleashing a denser wave of smoke, and emptied the extinguisher into the small room. Aiming at the seams in the walls and ceiling where the smoke seemed to be emanating, he saw no fire to fight. It was clearly behind the walls. Without specific training on dismantling aircraft panels, and fearful of damaging critical systems, his only option was to saturate the area and seal the door, hoping to contain what he could not see. The cabin crew acted swiftly, moving the rear passengers forward and opening air vents to try and push the smoke toward the back. When the senior flight attendant reported the incident to the cockpit, he used the phrase "fire in the rear lavatory," but in a critical miscommunication, he failed to convey the crucial detail that the fire was behind the wall and not a simple trash bin fire. This single omission would shape the captain's thinking for the next, most critical minutes. Captain Cameron, hearing fire, but mentally associating it with a common cigarette in no-bin incident, sent First Officer Ouimet back to assess. Ouimet left the cockpit without a smoke hood. The DC-9, built in an earlier era, was not required to have them. He was immediately met by a wall of smoke so thick he couldn't even reach the lavatory. Coughing and his eyes stinging, he returned to the cockpit and urged an immediate descent. However, he too omitted the key detail about the fire's hidden nature. Then, another report came from the cabin crew. The smoke seemed to be clearing. This was the most dangerous illusion of all. The fire, growing in intensity, had burned through bathroom plumbing and ventilation ducts, creating new escape routes for the smoke and momentarily reducing the volume in the cabin. Everyone was being lulled into a false sense of security, just as the danger was escalating exponentially. Captain Cameron, now faced with contradictory information, reports of fire and smoke, but also that it was clearing, made a fateful decision. He leaned on his experience and the statistical likelihood of a minor trash fire. he decided not to divert immediately. The plane remained at 33,000 feet. It was a decision born of confirmation bias, not malice. But in the unforgiving realm of aviation, misdiagnosis can be fatal. The precious minutes of their 17-minute average window were slipping away. The plane's systems soon delivered an unignorable verdict. The master caution light flashed. The left electrical bus failed. Instruments began to flicker and die. The heading indicator failed. Then, the transponder went offline, and Flight 797 vanished from air traffic control radar screens over Indianapolis. The controller, now alarmed, switched to primary radar, but he could only see a blip, with no altitude or identification data. Back in the cockpit, the situation was becoming a pilot's worst nightmare. The master warning light illuminated, indicating a failure of the emergency electrical buses. The pilot's primary attitude indicators, their essential reference for whether the plane was level, began to fail. The reality was now horrifyingly clear. The fire was eating through the aircraft's central nervous system, its wiring. Captain Cameron finally declared an emergency, shouting, "We have a fire on board." To a TC, he immediately retorted the throttles to idle, deployed the speed brakes, and pitched the DC-9 into a steep, screaming descent towards the nearest major airport, Cincinnati. The vertical speed indicator needle pegged at over 6,000 feet per minute. They were in a race against a clock that was already dangerously close to zero. Inside the cabin, hell had arrived. The smoke, now thick and toxic with burning plastics and insulation, poured from the ceiling panels and air vents. It filled the space from the top down, like a sinister, black waterfall. Passengers coughed and gagged, using wet towels handed out by the crew as makeshift filters. The PA system failed, so the flight attendants had to move through the chaos, shouting instructions for the brace position and how to operate the exits, their voices barely audible over the chaos. In the choking darkness, the simple act of breathing had become a struggle for survival. In the cockpit, the workload was immense. The smoke had invaded, stinging their eyes and forcing them to squint at their few working instruments. The loss of the horizontal stabilizer trim meant Captain Cameron had to use pure physical strength to control the plane's pitch, wrestling with the control column. To make matters worse, air traffic control had initially misidentified their radar blip and was vectoring them for the wrong runway. Without a functioning compass, the pilots could only follow instructions to turn left or turn right, flying blind through the clouds, their trust entirely in the controller's voice. In a final, desperate attempt to starve the fire, First Officer Ouimet made a critical decision. He turned off the air conditioning packs. His logic was sound: cut off the oxygen supply, but the result was catastrophic. It halted the only remaining airflow that was slowly venting some smoke. The cabin and cockpit became a sealed, superheated oven. Combustible gases from the burning materials began to accumulate near the ceiling, creating a volatile mixture waiting for a single spark. After an agonizing descent, they broke through the cloud layer at 3,000 feet. The runway was finally in sight. The landing was a violent affair. With the anti-skid system failed, the wheels locked on touchdown, all four main tires burst, and the DC-9 screeched down the runway on its rims, finally lurching to a stop. The time from the first circuit breaker pop to landing was approximately 20 minutes. What followed was a chaotic and tragic evacuation. The crew performed heroically, getting the doors open and slides deployed in seconds. The first officer, following procedure, began the engine shutdown checklist. Captain Cameron, exhausted from the physical strain of the landing, slumped in his seat. Within 90 seconds, 18 passengers and all 5 crew members had escaped the burning aircraft, but for 23 passengers, most seated in the middle of the aircraft, the thick black smoke made it impossible to find the exits. They became disoriented and lost in the narrow aisle. Then, the flashover happened. The superheated gases, now mixed with a fresh influx of oxygen from the open doors, ignited in a sudden, explosive fireball. The interior of the aircraft was instantly consumed in a raging inferno. The 23 passengers who had not escaped were tragically lost. The subsequent investigation was a painstaking process. They ruled out a rubbish bin fire early on. The cockpit voice recorder provided the crucial clue, the sound of electrical arcing just before the circuit breakers popped. The probable cause was determined to be an electrical short in wiring beneath the lavatory floor, likely related to the extensive repairs from the decompression incident 3 years prior. The investigation concluded that the communication gaps, the misinterpretation of the clearing smoke, and the decision to turn off the air packs all contributed to the tragic outcome. But from this tragedy arose life-saving reforms that echo in every flight you take today. The story of Flight 797 is a somber lesson written in fire, one that fundamentally changed aviation safety. It led to the mandatory installation of smoke detectors in all aircraft lavatories. It spurred the development of hands-free floor proximity emergency lighting to guide passengers to exits in thick smoke. And most importantly, it revolutionized pilot training, instilling the unequivocal rule at the first sign of smoke or fire: descend and divert immediately. Diagnosis can happen on the way down. The legacy of those who perished on Flight 797 is etched into the very fabric of modern air travel, making it one of the safest modes of transportation in the world. Their story is a stark reminder of the relentless pursuit of safety, born from the darkest of moments. If you found this deep dive into a pivotal moment in aviation history compelling, please support our channel by liking this video and subscribing to Winds of Thought for more content that explores the stories behind the headlines.